Hello everybody and welcome to a new edition of the show that is called Strange Times. Here, as usual, I'm your host, Leopoldo Pérez Obregón, and in this show we feature scholars to talk about the things that they are confused about, and then we go over confusions of my own about the topics that my guests know very well. This is Radio Cavolo, as you know, the independent media of the European University Institute. And yes, we are a radio university, and universities are a very complex type of thing. It's even more complex because the UI is also an international organization, so both things are in crisis. And which better guests could I bring to discuss this than Angela Liberatore and Marina Cino Pagliarello. Welcome to Strange Times. How are you?
Fine, thank you. A radio in a castle, never seen before.
What a privilege.
Absolutely.
And you, Marina?
I'm good, thanks, and it's true, this is amazing.
We could start in many ways, but I'm going to start with the usual question that runs this show, which is, what are you confused about? Whoever wants to start, and if you have a non-research related confusion, even better, so...
I will let Angela start.
Of course.
Because I'm very confused about my confusion, so...
Okay, fair enough.
It's my confusion moment.
Yes.
I think I will take advantage
Creative
of
confusion.
Can happen.
Well, there are a number of things I'm confused about.
Okay.
One is that in the last week we had really an amazing event for the 50 years anniversary of the EUI, and I was a bit confused about the fact that we seem generally to take for granted the fact that universities are, and I would say must continue to be, a space for independent thinking and to be a space for long-term learning and research. I think this is not to be taken for granted because the pressures are so many and so powerful that we better consider what can we do to preserve this, as well as, of course, transform universities in the way that respond to the challenges of our societies and so on. But first of all, what we value most, and I think this issue of independence, possibility of space for thinking, diversity of views, it's really important. Maybe it's just my impression, but I don't
know if it's your impression though, because when they talk about academic freedom and stuff, I feel quite free.
Good.
I think I can say whatever. Of course, I shouldn't insult our partners at the European Central Bank because that would be horrible. But it will be in the same way that I cannot insult a guest in the show, because it will be rude. But other than that, respectfully, I can set any ideas of my own. Nobody will come and say, Leopoldo, what is this paper you wrote about capital requirements? Are you crazy? No, I don't think. So I wonder why do scholars think this way? Do you have any concrete examples now?
Well, look, if you were in a university in the US, for example, and you were doing research on climate change or virology to find
the new
vaccination against hantavirus after COVID, or you would be doing gender studies, they would simply say forbidden words. That's the US. Here in Europe, of course, Central European University Saga, and previously in Poland, we are in a wonderful castle with the historical archives of the European Union, and you are an historian and somebody tells you, no, you're not patriotic enough in your historical account.
But that
so I think we really cannot take anything for granted. So it's not happening here, that's true.
Yeah.
So this is what makes this place quite...
But it's true that it's being a lot of discussion about protests, for example. And some professors don't like researchers protesting. Mm-hmm. They talk about that they cannot chant. I'm Argentinian, so if you dislike me, the least that I would expect is that you do a song against me. Otherwise, I will feel not honored enough in the anger. But if you tell me, okay, let's talk about the lyrics, okay, I will be fine. But this idea of people cannot protest because they cannot make uncomfortable the guests in the school. I don't know. I think that when you are young, you are all in protesting. Have you ever protested?
Oh yes, I did.
Yeah.
Marina?
No.
Yes, I
No.
did, and and my son does. So I'm very proud of this. It's about indignation towards things that happen in the world, which I think is very healthy and important. Of course, there are different ways of looking into that. Joseph Weiler was saying, and one of the scholars who says, I want to invite somebody with whom I really very much disagree, and then you can protest. You can even boycott my seminar. And I think that's actually a good balance. The important thing is to allow debate, including, very strong debate with a strong disagreement. Normally, in research, the strong disagreement should also be based on some kind of facts, evidence, methodology, and so on and so forth. But, some of them will be simply and strongly normative disagreement. So let's have that, but also then have the capacity to express yourself if you are really in normative disagreement with something.
Of course, the limit is when you don't allow other people to talk and express their ideas, which I guess, in the US I think is more radical. But let's go to your confusion, Marina. If you feel more comfortable, you can grab it as a crypto bro.
Well,
they like put it in your lap like this.
It's fine like this.
Okay.
Well, my confusion is sometimes why people should be confused about the role of universities, which I think relates a bit with what you were saying about protest and academic freedom, because I think that the biggest confusion starts really from this question: what is a university for? And here, we can give a couple of answers. Somebody will tell you that the role of universities is to produce skills for the labor market to solve urgent problems. No, you spoke about climate change, virology, and so on. Somebody else will tell you that the role of university is, not to be touched by what's going on now, because the role is to be, gatekeeper of long-term epistemological knowledge. Somebody else will tell you that the role of universities is to nurture and form the leaders of tomorrow, so this elite reproduction. And somebody else will tell you, the role of university is to form a critical mass, in a more, let's say, Marxist kind of way. Well, I think it can be all of these. So one does not exclude the other. It is true that now the role of universities is becoming more and more complex. We always hear about this, very polysemantic concept of the third mission of university. What does it mean, having this third mission?
And what is the third mission? I never heard about it. So I know very little about your topic. So my role here is like the uncle in the barbecue that just has an opinion. I'm representing that voice. So what is the third mission?
The third mission is, usually they say university has 3 kinds of mission. The first is research, the second is teaching, and the third is, this link with society, this, public engagement kind of thing. So universities have this responsibility as well, not only, to do their own research and teaching, but also to be able to go in conversation with society. So let's say that the third mission is exactly the opposite of the university as an ivory tower, right, Angela? What do you
Absolutely, I fully agree.
I think that coincidentally, and coming back to our anniversary, I was part of the closing plenary. I think I was the less popular speaker, by the way.
You were very popular, Leopoldo.
Nobody applauded me. Bastards.
We
They should have applauded me
we
more.
did applaud Leopoldo.
Yeah, but part of what I was signaling, because I'm more like a policy expert, I don't feel that I did my career around writing papers. And sometimes here at the EOY, for instance, when we need to implement projects that will bring money for doing research, you need people like me that can read a paper and say, out of this whole universe of things that we're creating, this is what is relevant for somebody that is handling central banking risks. Attracting these people now is very challenging because they are But honestly, I couldn't say this in the panel, but I think that when I go back to an authority, more or less what they will ask me is, Leopoldo, how was your vacation at the UI? Because in their mind, they think that we are here just chilling, you know. And the issue is, if universities don't also incorporate that they need this diversity of profiles, of skills, I mean, one person cannot do anything. Like, probably the guy that is very good at research is normally very bad with people, because they are alone a lot of time, they don't know. But then you have another one who understands the research, probably is not so good at going in depth, but is good at disseminating, doing a radio show with, relaxed content, I don't know. But we need to value all of these things, because then if I finish my period here, or whoever else of my colleagues, and then you need to go for the private sector or whatever to look for a similar role, you're also a rara avis that doesn't really fit here nor there. And this is part of the flaws of the system, in my opinion, that as institutions we don't value this diversity of skills, and we really need them. So I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I must say, I did my PhD here a few years ago, and I think that now I find much more explicit engagement and even advocacy about the need to have this kind of different skills and different profiles, and as Marina was saying, engaging with a third mission in addition to mission number 1 and mission number 2, whether they are all mission impossibles or possible, all the three, one can discuss. So I think from this point of view, there is more awareness and wish to have this kind of diversity. Now, as you say, it's not that each individual can be great, excellent, very qualified about everything. So the question is also what, for example, I was speaking with students in the master, in the School of Transnational Governance. They are clearly more, on the policy direction, it seems to me. If you have somebody doing a PhD here in history, probably this is more towards an academic kind of feeling, but you never know. I started with philosophy. I ended up working 32 years in the European Commission and ERC, so you never know where you go, also from history or other things.
What is your background?
My own background, well, I started with philosophy in Bologna, and then I came here for the PhD in political and social sciences.
Oh.
And, this year was the 50th anniversary.
Those guys do a lot of numbers, though, right?
Who?
The SPS.
The SPS. Well, that's an interesting point, because you have quantitative methodologies, definitely, particularly in political science, but also in sociology. But you also have very qualitative analysis, and for example, the people who with a background like mine will tend to have more of engagement with qualitative political science and connection with political philosophy. It's a little bit like the economist, being more in the econometric, very mathematical analysis, or the ones working more in the field of political economy. And I must say that, I saw during evaluation, for example, that sometimes the discussions are more difficult between people in quantitative and qualitative approaches than between different disciplines. But that's a little bit of that's maybe also part of the discussion that I also found a bit surprising or confusing about the notion of excellence.
Oh my God.
I had the impression that for some people excellence is an absolute, and for some people is a bit dispensable. And I think, I was 10 years at the European Research Council, where we keep saying excellence is the only criterion for evaluation and so on and so forth. But basically what this boils down to is to say quality matters in science, and we do not do evaluation based on other criteria. Other programs do, but we want not to have strings attached, so we only speak about this. So I do understand that the notion of excellence sometimes is misused to evacuate from knowledge, which of course is a social construct, and it is done by people and in institutions. So that's the, I would say, misuse of the notion of excellence. But I think also it cannot just be said, excellence is just what we define it is. Well, yes, it is, but there is something about quality in research, quality in education. You know, would you go to a university where somebody tells you, oh, the professors are very lousy? The programs? No, there is no program. At the end of it, you will learn nothing.
No, of
you
course.
would not do that. Would you
course.
ever give any money to do research and use the archives to somebody who will not even be able really to use the historical archives? So there is a matter where I think we need to have a good discussion, maybe also an intergenerational, but I don't think it's a matter of intergenerational one, about why quality matters as a matter of valuing the process of learning, the process of inquiring.
I want to come back to
especially
this.
in a world of fake news where everything matters, even lies, because, you know, facts, evidence, science, who cares? So I think I feel very strongly about this.
And I have many thoughts about this, like how do we define excellence? Because it's always coming back here at the UI, and why do we need to emphasize it so much all the time? Though it's, of course, we are trying to do our best, but that doesn't mean that. I mean, universities for regular folks are the place to go where they can then finish, get a degree, and find a job. That's the mainstream, to be honest. And then what we do here, which is to think deep and to do those things, yeah, fine. I mean, for most of the society, it's an addition. If you want to, I don't know, study. I don't want to throw any research under the bus, right? But, you know, for example, in Argentina, Milei got against the CONICET, which is the Center of Science, because they published paper about the cultural impact of the Lion King in the gender vision. And then the taxpayers were like, man, we have no money. Are we really financing this with public funds?
I'm going to contradict you right away. When I was at the European Research Council, do you know what was the single piece of news that had the most, you know, the most widely clicked, quoted, and so on and so forth?
Which one?
The first image of the black hole. Now, tell me the direct interest of the taxpayer for the first image of the black hole. But, you know, science and research and inquiry is also about the intangible of inspiring people.
Okay, but how much the black hole costs? Because it was there for free, we just observed, but financing a research of the Lion King with it, I don't know. It really can trigger people, you know, when you do this type, you need to be careful of not, you know, wasting taxpayers' money in random things. But I'm going to be cancelled for this. Marina,
yeah.
When we talk about universities as diplomatic actors, what does that mean even?
Well, it means, first of all, it very much relates to the third mission we were saying before, because apparently, and I agree with this, you know, excellence, producing excellent research, whatever this means, is not enough anymore, right? Because now universities are asked to explain what they do to the public, they are asked to be accountable to the public, and they are asked, you know, to engage with the public. When we talk about this diplomatic role, which I prefer to call informal diplomatic role, it does not mean that universities, you know, they replace the acts of states or the acts of international organizations or supranational organizations. It means that, you know, they use their own currency, their own mechanism, which is knowledge, basically, to achieve diplomatic aims. The role of universities in diplomacy now, you know, is much more in the agenda than it was before. It is much more there because we have, you know, much more formalized and structured collaborations, joint research, programs that, you know, for example, take the case of Ukraine, you know, what universities did when there was a Russia full-scale invasion with Ukraine was really to step up as informal diplomatic actors, even before the European Union or European Commission or member states issued some statements to condemn this aggression, universities were already doing this. So their role was much more, vocal, active, and faster than the one the European Commission. And with Ukraine, for example, as you know, in Ukraine, many universities became, shelters, and they were also destroyed because of the war. And what happened there was that universities were keeping channels alive, even though all the diplomatic activity was, going very, very bad. So this is doing a diplomacy for universities, engaging in relationship and collaboration at transnational level, solving problems and doing, some kind of diplomatic activity. And actually, you will be surprised to know how many universities also engage directly with embassies, with consulates, with diplomatic actors. So it's a role which is, growingly recognized, especially, when we talk about this science diplomacy, although now we are a bit in this domain of finding different labels. Somebody will tell you diplomacy in science, science for diplomacy, diplomacy for science, and so on.
Yeah, but that's all science diplomacy.
But this is all basically how research can contribute to diplomatic aims. And let me finish why they do this, and they do this with mechanisms which are completely different from the formal ones. They do this because they build trust, and they build a relationship, and they build really this bottom-up engagement in doing this.
Okay, so many things to unpack there.
You are not convinced. I could read it in your face.
Honestly, this is the thing. It is really different a humanities university from an engineer or whatever, because then we need engineers because these guys do missiles or something, it's practical. But I wonder if this impacts differently humanities universities than technical ones, right? Are we always talking about humanities universities when we talk about diplomacy?
No, we talk about all kind of knowledge produced in universities, regardless if it is, if you take the field of diplomacy, you can have cultural diplomacy, which then will involve, arts and humanities. You will have, cyber diplomacy, tech diplomacy. You will have, universities dealing with different type of diplomacy according to the specialization of that university.
But what does that mean? Like organizing an event?
Well, I think it can mean many different things. I don't know. Maybe Marina, you want to give
what does
some
it mean?
examples?
Doing this kind of
how does
practice?
For somebody who is not aware of what a diplomatic engagement.
I don't know. Okay, if you talk about this hardcore science that you mentioned, you take this project, Angela, we heard about it, called the Sesame project, which was about this solar system, and this project involved countries like Palestine, Iran, Israel.
The synchrotron of the Middle East.
Synchrotron. So it was really an example of how science, went beyond cultural and religious and political difference. If you take, arts and humanities, even, the creation of a branch university or a joint campus in a country in which then, you exchange with students and the students come here. This is also the role of the soft power of education, which is something that has always been there. Soft power, you were mentioning the US before, but US with the Fulbright program, in the UK with the British Council, in Germany with the HEIDI. That's basically diplomacy. That's using, education and knowledge to improve the relationship with a country, and this is diplomacy, in my view.
Actually, I think that we can even, Marina made the example of Ukraine, so let's put in the table, war and violent conflicts, right? So the first thing is diplomacy is very much needed, especially when people are not friendly with each other.
Okay.
Something that sometimes we tend to forget about the importance of this. And science diplomacy, and I might also make reference to the fact that we have a European framework for science diplomacy, to which I contributed and that Marina knows very well, and we are awaiting Council recommendation at the end of May to make this soft law for member states in the European Union. So in the case of conflict and war, you have a number of things happening also with regard to science, research, and higher education. One of the things happening is that more and more they are part of the civilian space, which is one of the targets of war. So, for example, the UI, without necessarily calling it science diplomacy, is involved with scholars at risk about the protection of scholars who cannot stay where they are and come here. And this is very important because science and research is made by people, so protecting people is very important. To do this, you will need the help of diplomats to facilitate visa, to deal with humanitarian corridors, and so on and so forth. At the same time, Marina was mentioning the case of Ukraine. I was still in Brussels when the sanctions towards Russia were issued almost instantly and implemented very, I would say, immediately and vastly. But for example, and I can say that very clearly, I think it was never a good idea to have sanctions also to young individuals, because if you break completely any form of dialogue, including with, for example, postdoc researchers, you just let them being completely isolated and in the hand of the dictator of the one place or the other.
That was going to be my actual next question with these things that you mentioned, because suddenly we use universities also as outreach, as engaging people, but then what happens if instead of being full of research, we end up full of spies?
Well, thank you for the straightforward question, because one of the challenges, I would say, in science diplomacy now is that, and I saw it when we were working on the European Framework on Science Diplomacy, is people say, it's naive, romantic, and whatever, because now, things are tough, and we need to be careful about research security. Now, scientists always have to be careful about research security. This is why there are research protocols on how to handle radiation or biosafety protocols and whatever. But true, we need to be a bit more careful, and this is why there are even, again, at the European level, some research security guidelines for the member states. And part of the science diplomacy task, I think, is how to keep this balance and proportionality between keeping the openness we need for ideas to circulate, data to remain accessible. For example, when somebody wants to cancel data on anything from climate change to history to whatever, and to let at least some people, particularly I would say the young people, being able to circulate, while being careful about the fact that you don't want to have certain materials being taken away or certain areas of sensitive science not dealt with carefully. Now, spying has been always the case. In some, in labs there have been always spies, Western spies in other places, and spies from somewhere else in Western labs. So this is not new, and it can be handled. And I think it's really very important to keep this balance, because sometimes the tendency is to just take the shortest route, which is close, ban, restrict, profile somebody. I mean, there was a law which was discussed in the Netherlands about profiling scientists and barring access to anyone with a specific nationality. Okay, that was, for example, about Iran. So if you're a dissident Iranian scientist, maybe living abroad for 10 years, you could not go if you were following this kind of blanket approach. So that's one of the areas where science diplomacy, I think, can help us trying to be as safe as we can in research while keeping the openness that is needed for research cooperation.
Però, if I may add, Angela, it is also true that statistically, many of the scholars that study and living in these countries are those who have been always very vocal against their own government. So they've been the first to be against. So, as I always say, you don't punish the knowledge. And punishing them will be punishing the knowledge. You think countries like, Israel, I mean, I can bet the majority of them is exactly against the war, and, they are doing whatever they can. The same is in Ukraine, the same is in the US. We have seen what happened when, Trump started with Brexit. When Brexit happened, what many, for example, one of the ways for universities, to keep, this bridge alive with Europe at the time was to join the alliances of the European University Initiative, because for them it was really a way to say, okay, look, we keep the channel open. The same happened when there was the closure of the Central European University in Hungary that was moved in Vienna, and immediately they joined an alliance. The same is happening in Serbia, as you notice, all these protests against the government in which universities have been very vocal. Serbia is one of, the best cases in which universities have been, really against the government, being punished, and there has been, this transnational support, and Brexit as well. Even a few weeks ago when UK finally rejoined Erasmus Plus, it was not simply celebration. No, UK finally we are back in the funding program. No, it was really considered a diplomatic act, up to the point that the British Council now is the agency in charge of Erasmus Plus in the UK. So it tells you a lot about this.
I can imagine more or less the answer, but what do you feel when at our university we go into this polarized debate of we are a university, no, we are an international organization, and those two arguments seem to be thrown around like as absolutes indeed.
Are they?
To me, no. But also, it's very difficult to
Was there such a polarization? Maybe I missed something.
Maybe there can be a sort
not in the anniversary, yeah? I mean, this thing sometimes comes up with the people that want to do more engagement or policy outreach, and the researchers that, no, we just do whatever we want and we write papers.
But this is not about being intergovernmental versus being a university.
That's what I also think.
It's more about whether that third mission is this creeping away on the first and second.
That's a good way to frame it. Do you think that happens actually, or is an over-magnified fear that some scholars have?
I will say the second, if I may, because when the UI was created in 1976, it was created precisely to give this, research and human face to the European integration process. So it was created as a knowledge-based institution, and it was not alone, because you also had the creation, for example, of SEDEFOP, the Agency for Vocational Education and Training in Greece, and the creation of Eurofound in Dublin, so working conditions of workers. So they both belong to the same story. And it was created, on the one hand, with this, pan-European mandate, intergovernmental structure to do study and research on issues that could interest contemporary European societies. So the three of them are, embedded in the DNA of the UI, and one does not exclude the other, to me, because this is what, the UI does.
But I must say, maybe, well, when, for example, I was doing my own PhD, the UI only had the 4 departments. Mm-hmm. Then the European Policy Unit was created, which then became the Schumann Center. Now we have the School for Transnational Governance. And the anniversary was also very adamant and clear, I think rightly so, about this being a European university institute, which is focalizing on European studies and issues, while, of course, in a global international context. So I think that, as Marina said, this is part of the DNA of the Institute. I can understand that some people might think if this becomes a sort of conditionality for each and all faculty members, for each and all, PhD students,
it's gonna be
it might be seen as, coming back to my first point, as undermining the independence and
Absolutely.
autonomy and long-term thinking, because it might be seen as, we become a sort of big consultancy. And of course,
That's
this,
the word that they use a lot.
completely-
You see, this
really?
is because
They say that?
I'm also the representative of the associates and fellows, so I go to the meetings on the council, and this often comes up. And to me,
become a consultancy.
yes,
Okay.
they really speak against it. Like it's stronger in the departments than in the Schumann, where, for example, many of the people that end up working on projects are also highly oriented practitioners, and this is why this dichotomy often comes up. But I think we can do both without losing our
so
identity.
the consultancy, why? Because in the end what we do is producing research that informs European public debates. So I don't see the consultancy element in it, and we do this with a critical mass, and we don't do technical assistance because this is not part of our again, interest and mandate and whatever. So why a consultancy? Because the research is relevant to policy making, and then because it is conceived
And because
as
maybe
a
some
consultancy.
stakeholders are big tech, some not stakeholders, some of the, in some projects, and some people don't like that, but then the discussion is, well,
Look,
then
but
don't use Microsoft,
Yeah.
disconnect your
But I
Outlook
think-
account. No, but then no, oh man.
Look, I think this is definitely a very important discussion to be having, and actually is this not always easy balance between the three missions and this issue of how can you be relevant without having conditionality on what you do. So when you said initially, I think I can do research on whatever I want, so that's the first metric to me. The day somebody says, no, you cannot do this PhD or you cannot do this class because it's not directly policy relevant, then the institute will have a problem. Okay? Because the institute clearly want to create
But
knowledge and vigorous teaching and so on. On the other hand, you have the Transnational School of Relevance with executive training. Executive training is where you transmit knowledge with the idea
That was
of
going to be-
informing policy making, people
Exactly.
in business and so on.
That was going to be my other point, which is here when we see ourselves in the difficult and very changing position of, okay, we need to go outside the funding from governments, and we need to go and chase students. We need to sell executive training. We need to, I'm going to say an ugly word, market ourselves. No, when you say we need to improve the management of the university, or we need to work better on this area, and you use those corporate words, it doesn't seem
Mamma
well.
mia.
Yeah, it does. It's not something that we are used to. It seems that we are, conditioning our freedom in some
Again,
way,
I
going
think,
for the market. Where do you sit on this debate?
I see it, first of all, that when we talk about consultancy, we should, put a word before consultancy. There was, a very nice article, I think, of Mariana Mazzucato last year about the difference of McKinsey or PwC doing a consultancy for a government, and the difference with, LSE, for example, UCL doing academic consultancy. And here the aims are completely different because, of course, the vision of the world view that a university has cannot be, the ultra neoliberal, ultra marketized, and the ultra, super profit view that, PwC, for example, can have. I hope it's not one of your funders and, listen to what I'm saying. But, academic consultancy is a bit different. So consultancy, I think, is simplistic to define this, because academic consultancy has, some good aims. Since on executive education, this is something that many other universities are doing much better than actually the UI is doing, because they are doing since, longer. And it's also a way, to get revenues that then, will improve if, of course, spent nicely and wisely. They're going also to improve, the quality of services in the university. Executive education, again, is part and parcel of what many do. Again, it depends, how you do executive education. The idea is that, when a professional comes here, you try to explain to him some concept, always drawing upon, theories and concepts. This is executive education.
But I think it's also part of the circulation of ideas, right? So actually I cannot judge whether the UI is strong or less strong than others. What I think the UI has, which is a bit more specific than other people only doing executive education, is that you do not get the standard education. I did a lot in the institution about leadership, management. Maybe we should have more on that, I don't know. But the executive education which is offered here is based on the research which is done.
About
executive
Europe.
education on climate change is about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Executive education on sanction is the research on
So it's
economic
research-based
sanction.
executive
So it's research-based
education.
education. And I think that one of the points also that comes maybe a little bit as a surprise in the final moment of the anniversary was that I had a little bit the impression that the idea was when there was this question about are we producing too many PhDs, and it seemed that some people were just counting the fact that anyone who has a PhD could find a job in the university. I'm not sure that's possible, but the point is this desirable? When you get a PhD, you might decide that you want to pursue research, possibly in academic environment, but you might also decide that you want to work in public administration, policy making, you want to work in non-governmental organization, you want to work in business. Mm-hmm. There are different types of business, by the way, not only the big corporate business, the small one, the starts up and whatever, and so on and so forth. So I think this is also part of the richness of doing this kind of circulation, on your own premises, and maybe people who are offering executive education also get some ideas from the people who are coming to receive executive education about interesting perspectives or prospects for themselves, for the students, so that we have a circulation within society. I think that can be useful.
And if I may add to this, because we did a report last year called benchmarking report for the Office of the President. I curated and I was the author of this. And we compared the UI across similar social science universities, so LSE, Sciences Po, HEIDI School, and so on. And one of the comparison was on executive education. And I can really tell you that the huge difference between the UI and others is the aim with which you provide executive education, which in our case it's really to connect research and European issues and big problems. We don't have this. Angela was referring the pure leadership course like LSE can have, in which executive education is really marketized regardless. So I think that what we can take away is that when people say we are a consultancy, well, we are an academic consultancy. We can be, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, we are a cool consultancy.
I would still not use consultancy.
It's not a great word. It's not a word. We're gonna offend everybody.
Evidence, advice, maybe analysis, contribution.
Exactly.
I said so many polemic things today that I think that if we say consultancy, it's gonna be one of the.
Can I make a congratulation for this setting, Leonardo? Leopoldo, because I was. Actually, before doing my own PhD, I was working in a community radio station in my hometown, Bologna. And first of all, this was not on top of a castle, as this very beautiful one.
That is by coincidence.
Absolutely. But, and I remember the mixer. Is this still called the mixer? Yes, mixer. Yeah. The mixer was basically as big as this table. So whenever I had to act it...
honestly, this...
Absolutely. And clearly, no cameras. This is very fancy. So, congratulations! This is
my
sort of community radio station, which is the very top.
This is my opportunity to show
gosh,
this
what
because
is this?
I bought this thing.
Nice.
As you can see there, it's what is that? The Badia.
Yeah.
You see how old? This is our own Badia.
Yes.
So far, I couldn't have the opportunity to show it because it doesn't really fit the setting. But we are in an old place with new technology, and this, of course, is the merit of the many colleagues that came before me and the editors of the radio, Jan Trevisan and Josephine Koppmann, who also opened the space for going into a new format, because before we were also doing only air frequency, but now probably the people who tune in to air frequency are mostly Italians.
Oh, okay.
While YouTube goes global. You can really set up a new live stream media that is of global reach with new formats. And we are also probably going to be doing cool stuff. We're going to do a festival probably of Radio Cavolo to gather more funds and to keep investing. So ideally we would like to keep growing and be a more impactful media.
How many people are actually watching, listening, and so on?
Well, it depends. Now we are small, but we are also not doing much dissemination. Okay. Because then you need to grab the video, do clips, write text, do thumbnails. You know, it's a constant ongoing that requires almost a full-time commitment, that now we have so much content produced and so little resources to disseminate. So for all of you listening, send it to a friend, click, like, comment, insult if you don't like. That also helps the algorithm. So yeah, all of that is a lot of work.
Thank you
so much.
No, but you're not closing the show without the favorite part of The Strangers, which is the strangest fact that you saw this week.
Oh
so,
gosh, the strangest fact that we said.
I'm going to start.
The strangest is this one, that I find this radio, which is very fancy. I thought about going in an underground thing as the one I was used to as a young student, and I find this fancy one. So that's the strangest thing. So
you find Radio Cavolo strange. That's a good one. Nobody has brought this one yet. So now I'm gonna give mine, then you finish, Marina, and we point each other's strangest facts and we comment. So I brought to you, I'm gonna go first.
Okay.
And I brought this, which is very weird in my view, which is that there has been like protests in South Africa for migration. And I've been seeing these videos and I feel very surprised about it, because one would think that the Europeans are the only ones that are doing this type of horrible things, or the Americans, but actually it happens everywhere. It's not only white people being horrible. So it's also Africans against Africans for internal migration, and they are dressed up in traditional costumes, I assume, but they go and bully and beat up people, and I find that very impressive to be happening all over the world, and I see it more increasingly on the news, the story of South Africa. So we need to bring a South African scholar next time to unravel this, but I find it pretty strange, to be honest. What do you think?
Well, after having watched this, I changed my answer. I think that perhaps, talking about people, this human element, in your case, underpinning a topic, which is migration, right? So the strangest fact perhaps was during your ideas, I would have expected, the big sessions being on topics, so migration, artificial intelligence, democracy, and so on. And I found strange that, many of them had this, existential element in common. So the role of people, the role of humans, the role of trust and individual responsibility. So that was strange for me, because I was expecting something else, and I saw much existential.
So what you're saying is that we academics are not used to talk about our feelings, or fears, or angst, or pain.
No, but
we hide behind topics.
It was interesting how, what everything, had in common was really the role of individual, and the importance of trust and individual responsibility in making, policies work. And this was, strange and nice at the same time.
Because I did felt that it was a space for people to air out their, feelings of strangeness about everything.
Yeah. I think this was more in the plenaries. I mean, in the sessions. I was in the one, of course, on security with Trine. We had a sound debate on some of the points we made, actually, also about cooperation or less in our very turbulent world. I was in the one on climate change, which, of course, ended up addressed this issue of climate justice. And so on, but I but it was really about what we know and how we can do
So it
better
was about
in terms
people.
of
That's
policy.
what I'm saying. The role of
So-
humans in all of these, which I had, was nice. Was a very nice thing to see that this existentialist kind of thing, this indigenous society very much.
That's good. So now it's time to end. We point each other strangest facts. So, your fact, Marina, I think it was somehow surprising, but more or less. So I give you a 6. Angela, I give you a 10 because
You're biased,
Because
it's
I'm very
bad,
biased.
This is a bias.
It's my show, and I give myself a 7 because I think I deserve it. So I scored. Okay, now you have to score us.
So for you, the strangest fact was the
Migration.
South Africa issue. I guess because you have not been trained on migration studies, I'll give you an 8 or a 7.
That's so generous.
If you were trained on migration studies, I would say you don't pass 5. So maybe you can go to guidance but it's
You have to be quick because
it's
then
voila. And Marina, I think she gave a very interesting dimension about this existential in addition to structural, organizational, institutional that normally we address. So I'll give her an 8 also to balance your vote. And for me, I mean, it's part of my biography. So for me, is I cannot give a vote because
you had to.
I have to.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll give myself, like you, I give you 8 to everybody.
Okay.
I
Marina?
don't make a big
I
decision.
give everybody a 10 because I'm conflict avoidant. So
Okay.
10.
And you?
10,
Yours?
10.
10. So I think
We are brilliant.
Radio Caulo won. So you won the strangest prize of the week, Angela. You had to choose your strangest prize to take as a token of your participation in this show.
Is really quite. And I have to say what I choose, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
We have our strange prizes there.
I also have a prize.
Yes,
Oh, that's
the
so
less
sweet.
strange prize. The Weird Podcaster.
Oh gosh, this is difficult, but I
This
guess
one.
I take this lady.
Let's show it
because,
to the audience. We got the Weird Podcaster.
oops.
Okay, lost half the suit.
So
Marina?
I think she's going to the future, and yes, like it.
I got this, which reminds me of, Sicily and Magna Grecia, kind of.
Oh, that's cute. A little cup. So, now we said goodbye. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you
coming to
very
this
much.
show.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Thank you.